Good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Richard Cooper, and I am the President and CEO of NYSPIN. Let me take a few moments to thank our sponsors. Tonight we thank TurnToTech, gold sponsor, for hosting this event. I will now turn this over to Bill, who will make tonight's introductions. Bill?
So tonight's talk is by two people who have never presented to us before. It's effective communication for project success and a proven tool to get it right. I'm going to introduce the two speakers in order that they will be speaking, and then I'll turn it over to Ravi. Ravi Bhatia, our first speaker, his 25 years in project management, he says, has been an adventure in adapting, connecting, and learning. He's managed projects in technology, real estate, and construction for organizations varying all the way from multinational companies to startups. He says he loves traveling, writing, and teaching. As founder of the company Communication for Geeks, in which he is joined by our other speaker, Gordon Adelsberg, Ravi is passionate and steadfast about enabling technology professionals to be great communicators. After tonight's talk, we encourage you to follow Ravi on his blog, getplg.com, which he says has led to a number of very exciting assignments, and who knows, it just might lead you to some exciting opportunities too. And by the way, in traveling, he says one of the travel places he loves most is Jamaica. Then Gordon Adelsberg, our second speaker. Now, I met Gordon at PMI NYC, and a number of you I know are members there too. So we thank them for helping make this all possible. Gordon's diverse background includes software quality control, research and development, management consulting, and life as an entrepreneur. He has developed food products which have gone into national distribution. He even created and sold something called Masterpiece Ice Cream Company. And Gordon, we'd really appreciate it if you would get some samples for us for handouts for the next meeting.
In January?
Yeah, and I'm even available for some quality control work too. After 10 years of management consulting, he's taken the CEO role at Communications for Geeks. Aside from work, Gordon says he played lead trumpet in several R&B bands. And he was an avid water polo player from high school until just a few years ago. And he survived all that so he could come and speak to us tonight. So our presentation again is effective communication for project success and a proven tool for getting it right. And our first speaker is Ravi Bhatia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Appreciate you taking the time. We're going to present an effective communication tool that's worked. It's a structured way of thinking. Give you a little background on Communication for Geeks. Having taught for many years at NYU as an adjunct professor, teaching project management and project controls, what I learned was that my students were great engineers and computer programmers, but the one thing they didn't have, or they were still evolving, were their communication skills. And coming from an engineering background, I know how painful and I know how difficult it was early in my career, where I didn't completely understand the career path and how do you get ahead. And so I came up with this idea of Communication for Geeks because I think that most people that I associate with in my career started out as technical people. And we use the word geek in an endearing way because we and most of the people that we know are geeks. But we believe that not only can we make a big difference, but by becoming great communicators, we can make a great impact. So we're pretty excited about that. Dr. Dwayne Andy Gustafson, who is one of Gordon's professors at Penn State in the MBA program, said every communicative act is infinitely improvable. And the idea of continuous improvement is at the core of Communication for Geeks, because we believe that it's not a destination. Communication is a journey, and it's a journey worth taking. Blaise Pascal, as some of you might know, a famous mathematician, says, I would have made this letter shorter if I had the time. So the idea of communicating with clarity is extremely important for technical people. And I think that today almost all of us come from some technical background, whether you're a computer programmer or a mechanical engineer or an accountant or a financial analyst. This common thread of a technical foundation runs through most of us, and that's a great thing. But having gone through that experience, the one thing that you cannot be completely conversant with is the idea of becoming a great communicator, because that's not in the DNA of what you're studying at the time. So we build like building blocks. We build a great technical foundation. And then we say, okay, then we get into an engineering position or an analyst position. And then we realize that, we want to go further, and we have great ideas, but those great ideas can get stagnated if we don't convey them. And what we're here to say is that the message is that there's a tool that we've developed that can help you think about communication in a more structured way. The residual message today: you can improve your communication skills by applying structure to your thinking. And this structured thinking is at the core of Communication for Geeks. It is a concept that's extremely simple, and if you take away that one thing today, I think that we'll feel pretty good about that. We'll be happy that we have conveyed our message in a meaningful way. Good communicators are 5 times more likely to advance. Now, we've done significant research into this. The Project Management Institute supports what we say. If you look at anything that's written by PMI regarding communication, and Gordon and I, we were pretty steadfast in this, that 90% of a project manager's job is communication. And earlier on, I had to laugh because I was told I shouldn't be doing this, right? I shouldn't be pacing back and forth because it's going to create a problem with the cameras. But I think that to be an effective project leader at a certain level, and maybe not in a very small company, but at a certain level in large organizations or in very complex projects, management by walking around really does work. You have to really love people, because if you don't love people, project management is probably not the right thing to get into. But having said that, once you love people and you love project management and you love the idea of enabling people to become better than the sum of their parts, at that point, you now have the responsibility to communicate with people and to inspire them and to get ideas from them that are dormant. I think people have incredible talent. I think even at managerial levels, corporations spend billions of dollars a year trying to extract the thing that's in your head. My first job coming out of General Electric, I was in a training program, and I wanted to get into something that was non-engineering related. So I got into sales engineering, selling construction equipment. And I was touring one of the factories, and there was a line worker who told me that the CEO at the time, Jack Welch, one of the famous CEOs, iconic management leader in U.S. history, he said that when he met Jack Welch congratulated him. He said, "Thank you, sir, for your 30 years of service to General Electric." And he told Jack Welch, he said, "Mr. Welch, for 30 years you paid me for these, but you could have had this for nothing." And that really stuck with me, because what that meant was that somebody did not inspire this person to communicate this idea. And usually I think the best technical ideas occur at the lowest levels in organizations. And as I tell my students, that as you move up the ranks as a project manager or as a general manager, you actually get dumber in certain ways. You get dumber in the sense that you cannot maintain the same technical prowess because technologies change. So your real skill set is the ability to communicate and lead and to inspire people to get their job done. The best project manager I ever worked with was not an engineer. She was at Alstom, she was an accountant, but because she knew that she couldn't solve the technical problems, she focused on the project, the people, the processes, and the communication. And that was a lesson learned, I think, as far as a young project manager, to learn that you don't have to be the greatest engineer to be a damn great project manager. And that was inspiring. And again, as technical people, we all have great ideas. And it really doesn't come down to money. It comes down to we want to make a difference in our organizations. We want to make a difference in the lives of the people that we lead. And these communicative acts, this a process of growing as a communicator, really translates also into our personal lives. It enriches everything that we do. And you could tell if somebody's passionate about the work that they do and the projects that they work on by you just have a sense of it. But if you can't communicate these great ideas, then those ideas remain a potential that's never realized. And then what good is that? So it's this realization that we want to get there. From a project management point of view, we've all seen that there's seldom time to really plan things properly, but there's always time and money to fix something. And an anecdote to that would be working in the real estate sector in New York. I worked for a rather successful real estate developer running construction projects. And the owner was, it was private family money, and they always had a pressure to get the construction project started. So there was a tremendous sort of tug of war between how much do we plan and how do we do this, and then later when things go awry because you didn't design properly or you didn't go through all the proper steps, and you found out that it would cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix a mistake. The money is always there for rework, and rework is especially nasty and is insidious on software projects. Because if the requirements aren't there and the requirements traceability matrix is not intact or it doesn't have integrity, then you're going to go through this. You're going to start and stop and start again. And this rework has not only a monetary cost, but it has a cost to the organization, to the morale, turnover. People's careers get stunted, and so where does this rework come from? Is it lack of planning? Well, where does lack of planning come from? Maybe lack of communication, poor communication, filtered communication, lost trust. So this is very destructive to project environments, and it's also destructive to organizations. Gordon? All of which leads us to rework and the request for more money, and that hurts. Gordon?
All right, so let's talk about what Ravi just talked about. And this is a structure I use all the time. Was there a good introduction? Did he build credibility? Okay, that's great. The residual message. What's the one thing he wants you to walk away with? Anybody remember? All right, I'll go back a little bit. You can improve your communication skills by applying a structure to your thinking. Whenever we give a presentation, we want to have one thing that you're really going to take away. Okay, back to where we were. Next, killer wake-up call. I call it a quack. Has everybody heard that expression? Killer wake-up call. That's something that gets the people's attention. You may have seen other people call it an attention grabber. I like quack because it just sticks in your mind. I think it's a neat little acronym. A quack. Well, your career is going to be stunted if you don't learn how to communicate. What's in it for me? 5 times more likely to succeed. So sometimes the quack and the what's in it for me overlap a little bit. And we're going to talk more about each of these. So what we typically do, we have our introduction word, build credibility. And I'm going to give you mine in just a minute. Then we'll have a residual message. What's the one thing you're going to take away from this whole presentation? Whether it's an essay, an executive summary, or a stock recommendation, whatever. What is that residual message? Killer wake-up call, the what's in it for me, and then your 3 pieces of evidence. And we're going to go with state, define, support, relate. That's coming soon. We use what's the 3 reasons to support, the 3 main pieces of evidence to support our residual message, and then we'll repeat the residual message. Whenever I'm struggling to give a presentation, anything, I just think through this structure, and sometimes you rearrange things and you move things in a different order, but this is always my starting point. So, back to the introduction. I want to give you 2 of them, and you guys tell me which you like better. Both of them are completely true. I'll start. Hi, I'm Gordon Adelsberg. My education is in food science. I actually went to Cornell, got a degree in food science. I developed nationally distributed food products, got a master's degree in food science. Then I owned and operated a small business called Masterpiece Ice Cream Company. Here I am today. Does that lend any credibility to me, to you, to talk about communications? No. Okay. No. So here's other information that's completely true. Hi, I'm Gordon Adelsberg. I've got 20 years business management experience, and I really learned how to communicate when I was a coach. I coached water polo when I was in graduate school, and I had to teach these 20-year-olds who wanted to socialize and they're all over the place how to be in the right position at the right time. I had to get into their heads and figure out how they think. I took that skill of listening to people with me, refined it when I went to business school, and then when I was in management consulting, I had to listen to people, somehow communicate my ideas into their heads, so they came up with the ideas and they were the brilliant ones who came up with it. And I found out that I was actually pretty good at it. And Ravi approached me with this business called Communication for Geeks, and I felt so strongly about what I can teach here that I put my consulting business on the side, and now I'm here to teach you guys and share my knowledge with you. Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm building here is credibility. So this is, whenever you give even an email to your CEO, well, why would he listen to you? What credibility do you bring? Next, the residual message. What's the one thing you want the people to walk away with? You're not going to remember everything that we talk about. You're probably going to remember about me ice cream, because I taught in water polo, just because you don't hear those every day. But I really want you to remember this structure, and we're going to pass out how we went through this. We're going to talk about that a little later. Killer wake-up call. When I was in management consulting, we were trying to sell a safety engagement, and the client was a bread manufacturer. They were spending a fortune in workers' comp. People get hurt on the job. They were tripped on the stairs, get electrocuted. I sat in front of the management and I told them, you have to sell $250 million worth of hamburger buns. They're a bakery. Literally, $250 million worth of hamburger buns to cover the cost of your on-the-job injuries. Think about that. It's a lot of hamburger buns. $250 million worth, $250 million. So they eventually signed up with us. They asked me not to come back, but that's a whole other story. I told them the truth, not what they wanted to hear, but that's one for, we can talk over beers. That's killer wake-up call. The next is what's in it for me. What do you gain out of this? So what I tried to do is I spoke to Bill at length about what this group is all about. So for you guys, I think this is a nice little change for you. Normally things are much more technical, but here's something you can walk away with. It's a tool you can use because everyone has some sort of technical background here. So that's the what's in it for me. Then we'll go through 3 pieces of evidence. I'm going to go through those right now. First, some comedy. I once shot an elephant in my pajamas. How I got in my pajamas, I'll never know. How many people remember Groucho Marx? Anybody? Okay. Just remember, what you say is not always what they hear. When I had my ice cream business, I would tell people stuff, and they would say, Gordon, but that's not what you said. That's what I thought, but that's what they said. Eventually, they knew me well enough so it didn't matter what I said. They did what I wanted anyway. The point is, you need to be very clear about what you're saying, and don't look for alternate meaning, and don't present alternate meanings. Has anybody else seen this? You have anybody have any examples? You said one thing that was taken a completely different way. You have anybody have one you want to share? If you have a question, comment, raise your hand. I don't want to hear myself talk the whole time. I'd like to hear from you all. All right, next slide. Okay. You need to, first thing in the structure, you really need to be sensitive to those around you. Figure out what's going on. Have you ever been talking to someone and you look at them and you say, are they listening to me or waiting for me to stop talking? Or have you ever been on the receiving end of that? Someone's talking on and on, you have, just stop already, just stop talking. Well, these are problems. Or sometimes there's a complete lack of communication. There's a lot of reasons that people don't understand. Sometimes you send a very unclear message. Or you, for instance, you'll see an email, it's this long email, but what you really want is all the way at the bottom. It's a muddled message. Or people will say one thing or do another. So the sender has a lot of responsibility to be clear and concise. The receiver has his filters too. Look at the second one. Impatience, New Yorkers? Come on, get to the point. For instance, talking to tourists. They want to tell you the whole story. Come on, I'll help you, but let's get to it. How many are guilty of number 3? I do that one all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So you've already had your response.
Quite rude.
Thanks, Ravi.
It's like I was rude, right? That interrupted. I'm sorry.
No, he's absolutely right. Sometimes we're not in the moment. We're already planning our next brilliant response. We're not really listening to the people. We all have our built-in filters. And we also, ambiguity. If we don't know, do we make stuff up and just fill it in on our own? I do it too. We're all somewhat guilty of it. So what I used to teach when we did incident investigations back in my safety days, listen. Don't think about the next thing. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. There's a reason for that. Listen to what the person has to say. Then ask questions. In our bigger our 2-day seminars, we do a nice little module on this, active listening. Person talks, you repeat it back, and you say, is this what you meant? And they say, oh yeah, that's it. Then you ask for the clarifying questions. So what I want you to take away from this slide, you really need to be sensitive to those around you. Listen and ask questions. And can I pass me water, please? Thank you very much. Next, remember we talked about the whiffing, what's in it for me, and how we untuck it. We're good. Whenever you communicate to someone, they're going to be in a different state at the end. Maybe it's a small change, maybe it's a big change, probably small. I like to think of it as this arrow. This is where they are now, and this is basic process redesign. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? What's the value? And then the arrow is how to get there. So let's think about that future state, and let's do a little exercise. This is where we can all talk, instead of me just talking. Can you type in here? Actually, I'm going to have to move a little bit. So, okay. So this exercise comes from my consulting days. How many people have done a stakeholder? Wait, back up. How many have done a stakeholder analysis? Wait, hold on. Just stakeholder analysis? Yes. We're done. When I have to think, why is this important to someone? I do a little whiffle. Suppose and I want to use this fun little example. Suppose a farmer changes his family's breakfast from oatmeal to ham and eggs. You ever heard the difference between the pig? Okay. So.
Well, tell us about it. What is it?
The difference, for those of you who haven't heard this one, a ham and eggs breakfast, the difference between committed and involved, ham and eggs breakfast. The chicken is involved, but the pig is pretty committed. So I don't think we have to type any of this stuff in, but we can just do this as a group here. And this is this is the tool that I use to figure out what's in it for me. Give me who are the stakeholders here when we switch from a farmer's breakfast. His wife wants to switch, he wants to switch his family's breakfast from oatmeal to ham and eggs. Who are the stakeholders? Just shout them out.
Family members.
Family members. You say the kids, right? Who else?
Grocery store.
What?
Grocery store.
Grocery store? Could be. That's a maybe. Okay.
Pig and the chicken.
The pig and the chicken. Sure. Okay. Now this is an old, what?
What about the farmer's family?
Yep. The farmer's family. We have the wife. We have the farmer. Let's just say it's an old-fashioned family, so the mom cooks breakfast for the kids. Okay. So let's just pretend, let's put, for number 1, let's put the wife. All right, we're having technical problems. That's okay, we can talk it
Let's
through.
pretend we did.
All right, so what I use is, and you don't have to use all these columns, this is just one of my tools, influence on the change. For instance, the pig, he doesn't really have a say in the matter. He has 0 influence on the change, so I'm not going to even worry about him. Not for now. The wife, well, yeah, she can probably say, I'm not doing this. She could be a big influencer. So I take this little chart, and I run through it. Influenced by the change. Well, is the chicken influenced by the change? The chicken? Maybe a little. His eggs, instead of going to market, they're going to go to the breakfast table. Is the farmer influenced by the change? Maybe not. Is the pig?
We don't know why he wants to make this change.
Right. Okay. So then you do, what are his concerns? You don't need to do this necessarily in a real formal setting, but before you give a presentation, or before you write that summary to the CEO, or before you talk to your sales guys, or before you go to your customers, spend some time, think it through. Just make this little chart and say, okay, why is this important to the guy? What in his life is going to change? What's going to be better or worse? Next one. The next. Let's talk about the residual message. So, to get to this one thing, this one structure we want you to walk away with, we had a lot of information. We have research, we have data, we have logic, we have process, we have all these things, but we need to filter it down here. So, if you're giving a presentation or writing up something to your boss, how much data do you have? Often you'll have tons and tons of data. You'll have flow charts. But what's in it for them? Do they need to see all that stuff? Probably not. This is usually the most difficult step, figuring out what is really that residual message. We did this same presentation, well, actually it's not the same anymore, for NYU.
NYU Poly,
Yeah, NYU Poly.
Management of Technology
Yep.
students.
Yep. But we had to come up with a different residual message. For them, it was how important communication really is to your career. But you guys, for the most part, know that. Most of you have been around long enough. You understand that if you can't communicate, it's not that you're not going to succeed. We want to give you a tool and walk away with this residual message that put a structure to what you're thinking, and you're going to be in a much better position for success. So let's go to the next one. Let's just click all three of these so they show up. When you're communicating to within your company, you have people at 3 different levels. They generally see things in different ways. The folks in the C-suite, they don't really need to see the data. Some of them may ask for it, some of the more technically minded one, but they tend to think outside the business. If you're making a change either in your software or implementing a new management system or building a new plant or any big change, they need to think, how does this affect the community? How does this affect us against our competitors? How are we going to finance all this stuff? They think externally. When you talk to your directors and business leaders, they tend to think financially. Well, what's the return on investment on this? Out of whose budget does this come? So for them, you need to start showing ROI. Finally, the people, not the lower levels, but at the more technical levels, they tend to think much more internally. How am I going to get the data from this guy to this guy? How am I going to make the boxes flow through my supply chain? How am I going to get my products out to the market? What's the nitty-gritty? Who's going to write the code? And this is where you dig much more deep into the metrics, where you show a lot more data, and you tend to have much more operational meetings. So when you're structuring your message, either in a presentation, either in a one-page document, you need to start thinking at these different levels. This is one of the things I took away from my professor, from Dr. G, or Andy G. Every communicative act is infinitely improvable. So, let me grab my water here. What that means is edit, edit, edit. And we're going to go through a couple examples here of how you can make your stuff a lot better. Second one here, I don't think you've all heard of this, not yet, because we just made it up. It's called the SWNS Test. Oftentimes, you're going to look at a slide and you're going to say, yes, so what? What am I supposed to do with this? I was having a chat with a senior manager at Cisco, an old friend of mine from North Carolina. She said when her people come to her, she'll look at the slides and say, yeah, well, so what? What do you want me to do with this? And I thought, okay, I like that. Well, let's build on that and let's make an acronym that's going to stick in your mind. So for every one of these slides, I want you to take a look and say, yeah, so what? And what's next? And we call it the SWNS Test. Next time you're going to look at your email, you can take this with you or do this tomorrow morning. Or look at your last presentation, look at one of your slides and say, what was I thinking? So what? Next one. So let's go through an example. Let me give you just a minute or two to read through this. This is from a typical consulting engagement. And tell me what you think of this slide.
It's boring.
boring. That's one thing. Let's wait till people finish reading.
Too much information.
Too much information? I want you to hold on to that thought. Because, how about you? What do you think of this one?
About the pizza?
Yeah, it's just, so what? Exactly.
It's a process that could probably be mapped out or a little more
Right,
concisely
right.
to follow it,
So
instead
the-
of reading textually.
Yep. So remember, every act is improvable, every communicative act. Any other thoughts on this one?
It's just a big wall of text.
Exactly.
Compartmentalize it
Big
into.
wall of text. Yep. So let's go to the next slide. Identical, same information. How long does it take you to figure out everything that's going on in this process?
Not too bad.
6 seconds.
Exactly. I like to use I didn't put it in the slide here, the 10-second rule for every graph. A graph should tell me the entire story within 10 seconds. In graph or graphic. Let's look at it and say, I know exactly what's going on here. Okay, back up to one. So the point is, this is just a nice, simple process. And that picture of it is worth 1,000 words. It's so true. That's why this is always stuck. So let's do another example of how to make of improvable information. This is from, oh yeah, let's do a SWNS test for this one. So what next steps? This is from my research when I was in graduate school, first time through. What does this tell you? This was two different processes. We found we were working on
Says
peanuts.
you had, October was a little bit, you got more out in October than any other month,
Yeah,
just on the,
sure. What happens is we had a new method for processing peanuts. And the top one is the current process, and this was the experimental one. The second one was the experimental. So you look at this, and as a business leader, you say, so what? But this is all factual information. So let's improve this a little bit. Identical information. Well, now what? Now what do you see?
you see, the
Yeah.
current is still better, but experimental is better overall.
Yeah. This tells me, without any investment, gee, I can double my capacity. And I can extend my processing. So the point for this is every communicative act is infinitely improvable. So think through, look at these slides, and you say, so what? When we go through those 3 bullet points that we talked about, just think about them and say, yeah, well, so what? Let's go to the next one. Let me do this one, and then you get the next. Okay. So let's do a little review. Introduction. Why do we do an introduction? What do we get from that?
Credibility.
Yes, credibility. What's next? Residual message.
What's the message you want them to take home?
Yep. And the best way to get through that is to edit, to edit, to edit. This, if you get nothing else, really concentrate on that clear, concise message for your listeners. Killer wake-up call. You guys remember that
Get
quote?
their attention.
Yep. Then we have the what's in it for me.
Tell them why you want them to do it.
Yep. Then we'll have our 3 pieces of evidence. So did you see the 3 pieces of evidence here?
Support your case.
Yep. Yep. So do you want to go through? Do you guys remember those? Let's go all the way. So our first piece of evidence, it's going to help you to be sensitive to those around you. It's going to help you clarify your thinking. And remember, every communicative act is infinitely improvable. So these are what we thought were 3 good pieces of supporting evidence. So did we see the 3 main points? Okay, now I turn it back over to my partner, Ravi. You want me to go? This is your.
Yeah, I'll do this.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
You want to run this? Yeah. So here's the structure that we talked about today. Basically, you want to get the audience's attention, or if you're sending an email, the executive's attention, or depending on who you're talking to in the organization, you have to really know the audience. I'll give you a really good example of this, and this is something that has stuck with me for many years. When I worked for Alstom, I essentially had two bosses. One was an American boss, and he was vice president of projects, and the other one was his boss. But and he was sector senior vice president, and he was French, and kind of worked for both of them. They asked different types of questions. Stefan, who was the sector senior vice president, He was looking at things strategically. So he was concerned with where's the business going, how are the projects that you're managing, how are they going to affect my portfolio of projects, and are we continuing to improve? And he was extremely analytical because that's really the culture he came from. Both were engineers, but Stefan was super analytical in terms of reporting and in terms of grilling project managers to report the analysis behind every thought, behind every recommendation. Lou is an American. And Lou just wanted an email that said, look, Lou, I got a problem. This client's not behaving. They're not paying us. They're not approving a change order. This is what I recommend. I think we should beat them over the head with a club. And what do you think? And Lou would say, well, I kind of like that idea. Go ahead. Here's a club. Go beat them up. But if I sent that to Stefan, he would think I'm crazy. He'd say, crazy American. So for Stefan, I would say, Stefan, here's the receivables from the client. Here's the curve on the change orders. At this rate, we are going to turn a $10 million project into a $15 million project, and that last $5 million is going to be a negotiation, and we're going to have no leverage. And here's the data on previous projects, and here's what the project team thinks, and here's what the contracts person thinks, and I'll check with legal, and here's like 10 pages of analysis, and he would say, boom. So the point is, same issue, two different people, and depending on who you're sending it to, you're tailoring it. So, introduction, residual message. We talked about the residual message. What is the one thing that your audience has to remember? And in this case, there's a tool, and it involves structure, and structured thinking will enable you to become a good communicator. And just the act of thinking about structure, is going to be very important. A killer wake-up call. If you communicate well, you'll advance in your career. Companies and organizations will be more successful. Your projects will be more successful. Your career will be on a more vertical path, and you will enable people and you will empower them to succeed, which I think is even more important than any of those other things, because that's your job as a manager, as a project manager, is really to be sort of unselfish about these things. And one of the things that we like to talk about in terms of project management is that I tell my students and I tell people that work for me that if you're going into project management because you want to be a boss, you're going in it for the wrong reason. In fact, you take the organizational triangle, where the boss is on top, and then you've got all the people working for the boss, the technical people. I turn it upside down. The project manager is really at the bottom of that triangle because the project manager is actually the servant for the team. So if I was giving this talk on project management as servant, then my residual message is, you're a servant. And if you don't want to be a servant, don't be a project manager. In fact, if you want to be in a leadership position and you don't understand that it's about serving others, then maybe you're in the wrong job. You should go do something else. So there's a killer wake-up call. We reduce rework. That saves money, makes us more profitable, enhances our career, saves our job. We can buy food for the family. It's really great. With them, what's in it for me? We become better, organizations become better. And so you state, define, you support, and you relate. And you think about this thing as an iteration. So you do it again, and you do it a third time. And then at the end of a presentation like this, so you're not always going to be giving a formal presentation, but this is analogous to a proposal. Let's say you're giving a technical proposal. You're going for a software project, and your team goes in, and it's a proposal. So it's not purely based on price, but it's based on your experience and the qualities that your project team brings in. But you've got to be able to make that mark and state what you're going to state and then restate it at the end, which is kind of what we're trying to do, so that it sticks. And then so you can be doing a proposal or an email. Or how many of you have been in a situation where you do a 2-minute elevator pitch? You know what that is? 2-minute elevator pitch. You happen to be in the elevator with the vice president of the division and somebody that you don't see maybe once every 6 months, and you've got 2 minutes to do this. And I used to go through this a lot when I worked for a real estate developer, because the owner would sometimes disappear for weeks at a time, maybe vacationing in France or whatever. And then sometimes he'd come back, and it was like an episode out of Seinfeld. He'd say, follow me, and I'd follow him around. And I had 2 minutes. And he'd say, what's the problem? And then he had no time for me. And I said, well, Robert, we got problems, and you didn't approve this, and this guy needs to get paid, and this contractor is belligerent. And he said, follow me. And I followed him, and he goes into the bathroom. And I feel like George Costanza. What am I supposed to do? So I go inside, because I might miss something. But that's, so that's what it is. It's really interesting. But you got that 2 minutes. So if you're in an elevator, it doesn't have to be an elevator, but if you're in a situation, you've got 2 minutes to deliver a message, you don't have time for any externalities. Here's the message, here's what I can do for you, what's in it for me, which is the other guy, and here's how I can help you. And I know a guy who started a $50 million mechanical construction business because he was a successful contractor working for contractors on Donald Trump's projects. And he happened to be in an elevator with Donald Trump. And he had probably less than 2 minutes because it was a really fast elevator. And he said, Mr. Trump, I'm your mechanical contractor. You know I'm successful. I've done great work for you. I want you to help me out. And he said, I like you. I'm going to fund you and grow your business. And that business started like that. He was an engineer. So residual message. It starts with the residual message. And having said that, yeah, we're going to give you a little cheat sheet so that you don't forget these things. And it's actually in color. This is not our logo, but maybe a little later we'll show you some logos we are exploring. This is a temporary placeholder. And we are about to launch our logo next week. But we went from 15 to 4 to 2. So we're down to 2 now, 2 or 3. So you might be able to help us with that. So that would be kind of cool. So before we get to Q&A, we're going to hand out sort of a fact sheet. Yes, Bill?
Before you go on, could I just take a break? I want to make sure everyone gets a chance just to see this and see if anyone has.
Okay.
Someone might want to ask about this thing. Was there anything in particular you want to point out about what was like the hardest thing to get in this document, and then see if there are any questions?
Hardest thing.
I think the most important thing is knowing your audience, first of all, whoever that person is. Once you know your audience, at least you've got a starting point, and you understand that that audience, if it's a CEO, they're not going to have a lot of patience and time to go through every last piece of data. And after that, I'd say, remember, if you leave with nothing else, make sure that residual message sticks.
I think that was particularly challenging because you'd never been here before.
Right.
Except that, fortunately, see, we have a program committee and a board who's very committed to saying that we have programs that people are going to actually find really interesting. So we gave you a lot of feedback, and there are a lot of things we said, when you first showed us, we just didn't say, fine, whatever,
We had a head start. We had a lot of help from you and the team, so that was very helpful.
You really accepted that very graciously, and you really said, okay, we want to work with this, instead of just explaining why you want to do things a certain way. That was really great, that give and take.
Yeah, so we tailored the WIFM and the QUAC. Does everybody remember what a QUAC is without looking? QUAC? Right. We structured those specifically
Just think
for the group.
$250 million worth of hamburger buns. Killer wake-up call.
What's that?
How many hamburger buns would that have been?
I don't. It's a lot. I don't remember.
About probably $1 billion. If it's 25 cents a bun, it's $1 billion.
Something like that. A billion buns. Yeah. That's a story. I can tell you that story over beer. It's an interesting client. Right. Okay. So, what other questions do you have about this structure? And then we'll go over. Then we have an example. Then we're going to critique an article that we got from PMI.
Yes, Bill.
Well, what's the difference between some so-called a call to action? Some people call it a call to action.
Yeah, same thing. Yep.
So is that fit into one of these things, or is it sort of a little different from what you've used? Because I see you're not using it.
Sure. A call to action is an attention grabber. You see, you see those. Remember those Alex Struthers commercials where they had the starving kids?
Yeah.
The killer wake-up call.
It's a killer wake-up call. Yeah.
Children are dying is a killer wake-up call. So it's a very, very similar concept.
But that doesn't tell you what to do. It just says, here's a major problem, get your attention.
Right.
But then call to action is what you're actually telling them you want them to do, or suggesting.
Yeah, it's, it's a different structure. There's lots and lots and lots of them. This is just one that I use. But I've seen one where relate to the audience, call to the action, and then what I should do. I've seen STAR. That one, situation, task, action, result. We use those at job interviews. So something like that, that's whatever structure you would have, and that would be a part of it, that's what you would use. So this is not the only way to present information.
How would you modify this or change it to introduce new process if you, as a consultant, you found that things aren't working as smoothly as they should and you want to alert management that you have a proposal to change the process?
Okay, that's a great question. Let's go through it from the generic one. Okay, so the introduction, they know you, you've got a relationship with them. What's the one thing you want them to know if they walk away with anything?
that there's probably some process improvement that needs to be made in order for them to get the business results they want.
Okay, well, why would they need to do that? Is it costing them money?
Yes, it's costing them money, or it's inefficient, or they can't move as fast as they want.
Okay, think about Six Sigma and voice of the customer. And if I'm a let's say I'm a director level, well, great. What's the scope of this problem? Is it $1 million? Is it 10 million? There's my clock, right? Okay, so you say I've got this problem, and we need to improve our process. Well, tell me why. How do you know this is true? Because
Evidence.
yeah, give me the 3 pieces of evidence.
Maybe some metrics.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I would start with a structure like this, and then you tailor it around. Sometimes I do the with him first. Sometimes if I'll move the quack first, I'll say, guys, it's panic time. Look at what's happening here. But yeah, if you start with this and just organize your thoughts and just understand what's important to these senior guys, and then show them the evidence.
Thanks.
Other questions about this one?
What if you want to propose something completely new as opposed to an improvement?
Same thing. So why would we do this? Why would we completely change this? What's the benefit of it? What's the
Well, say the company's always interested in developing new products. Something new. That's part of what they do, like Google or something.
Okay. How would I say that? I have done that actually. Okay. I say we want to launch this new product. Our market analysis tells us that the size of the market is X. 3 pieces of evidence. Our competitors are launching this one. We know that this market segment is available, or people are copying us. So there's our 3 pieces of evidence, and then back to the residual message. Hey, we need to release this new product. So it's just same thing. So up here it's a very generic structure.
One other question. You used the chart before where you showed the stakeholders,
Yep.
right? So if I'm presenting to 3 distinct stakeholder groups and I want to improve that process and have them communicate, what is the best way to format the presentation so that you're acknowledging each stakeholder's group's needs, but you're communicating in a way that's not going to cause a reaction like, well, we can't do it the way they do it because we do it differently in this department. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
You don't want to show any. The idea is you want to structure that to.
If you repeat the question, I'm not sure the mic picks up.
Yeah. I'm trying to think how.
Yeah.
How do I restate that question?
You have 3 stakeholders, and you don't want any one particular stakeholder to be slighted in any way. You want them to feel like they're on even playing field, even footing, even though they may not be.
Well, just keep them from being reactionary.
Right, and then that's a great word, I think, reactionary. This goes back to the awareness that we talked about. That part of being a great communicator, I think, is, and not that I'm not saying we're great communicators. I'm saying that we're on a journey. That we recognize that we need to become great communicators, all of us, in this journey. So the reason awareness becomes very important is because if you don't have awareness, what you're doing is you're not really living in the current moment. What you're doing is anticipating a question, not listening, and then, okay, you're thinking about your next thought. So you have a lack of awareness, you have a disconnect. The other thing you're doing is you're not really thinking about the problem. You know, if you're presenting something and you're just thinking about how you're going to react to how somebody else reacts. So part of our problem, I think, for all of us, I mean, globally, is that we're trained technically, and part of the technical training is that if you're an engineer, you have a formula, you've got an input, you've got an output. So it's kind of reactionary, right? You see a problem, okay, you know what, I know there are 3 or 4 black box theories I can apply. I can apply some equation and I'll solve this thing, or I'll program this thing. But it's still very reactionary. And the idea of being non-reactionary is to suspend judgment before you react. So if we all do that in a management setting, then it becomes easier to convey ideas, and also conversely, it becomes easier to accept ideas because you're not spending all of this energy and not wasting your time judging the other person. And to your point of making a presentation, 3 stakeholders, I think you have to disarm them by getting them to feel that, look, this is not a judgment call. This is about getting 3 very important stakeholders who all have an important place here, and we want to address the needs of all of you, and maybe that matrix becomes a three-dimensional matrix. Whatever that structure is, the idea is give people a chance to say your needs are going to be somehow quantified and qualified in this matrix.
One way I handled that problem at Washington Metro, the subways and the buses, we had two people and we were trying to make an improvement, but one guy said one thing, the other guy wanted to do something differently. I put them in a room together and we did a process map. And we mapped out step by step. And they said, oh, well, that's why you're always bugging me for that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That was, my approach was going to be, and I wanted to just bounce it off you, is get them in a room and do a collaborative, session where I elicit what they think is good ideas, and then we formulate that.
That's very useful. I don't want to get into negotiations because that's a whole other thing that we're looking at. But as project managers, we're always negotiating, right? And I think as project managers, we're also, conflict is part of project management. If you have a project without any conflict, that's like saying you want to eradicate the laws of economics. You might as well go to a zero gravity world because it's not going to happen on Earth. So the idea is that when you negotiate, and if you're on complex technical projects, there are many, you can make the pie bigger. Don't just look at the dollars, look at other things that you could give up that don't cost you anything. And this idea of making the pie bigger is a tremendously successful way of thinking about negotiating technical issues on projects.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
We have one more thing. Do we have time? Or are we, okay.
All right. So we have sort of a little article published by PMI. It has to do with a killer wake-up call, which you'll kind of see. So we can identify the killer wake-up call. That's a start. I won't tell you what it is. But take a look at this. And the idea is that there's a tremendous wastage in the medical industry because of infections. And here's an article that is identifying a problem, giving you a killer wake-up call. But what is it not doing? What is it doing? We're critiquing this article against the backdrop of our model. And we're wondering, does this fit? Have they addressed the things that we talked about? Are they missing anything? And we're just trying to think critically here so you walk away with a little bit more than you came in with. So what's the killer wake-up call?
You want to take a minute to read it? Or
Yeah.
just glance over it?
Hospital-acquired infections cost the U.S. system $30 billion a year.
Right. That is a killer wake-up call. $30 billion.
That's a lot of money.
That's a huge chunk of change. So there's your killer wake-up call. Have they provided the supporting evidence? Have they provided a residual message?
They're giving you possible ways of preventing.
Possible, yeah. So they're giving you some evidence and some things that can be done to improve the situation. The residual message is kind of, I think it's there, but it's kind of implied, which is, hey, we spent $2 trillion a year on medical costs in the U.S. and if that's the number, and then here's a significant percentage, and so we got to do something about this. So perhaps that's the residual message on this.
What do y'all think? What do you think is a residual message here? And everyone's probably going to come up with a different answer.
You need to focus on disinfection.
Could be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
There's no right or wrong answers on this.
An awareness of that this is happening. The whole article is raising awareness to the fact
Right.
that money is going out the door for these major areas.
And sometimes the residual message might be restated in a better title or something that kind of more of a grab,
Yeah, I'll give you another minute to glance through. But what I found when I really thought through this from what PMI was trying to do is that, hey, one of the great things, I think the residual message is project teams can do all sorts of great things. I think that's what they're trying to get at here. That's my opinion.
Which is often the residual message in many of their articles.
Yeah, exactly. I think it might be in the context of their PMI magazine.
Yeah.
That look at all the great things that a project management team can do.
Well,
I don't know.
the other message that I get is that usually people categorize projects as revenue producing or cost reduction. That's the major category. So this is cost reduction, but it's by introducing new ways of doing things. So it's
Right.
both introduction.
It's both, actually.
So it's thinking outside the box.
And a social good.
Social good and to save money, and who doesn't want to reduce infections? So it's a holistic win-win.
Yeah, I
for
mean,
everyone.
nobody could be against reducing infections, especially needless infections.
So from what I'm hearing is that same article, completely different message to different people. So it's kind of like this guy. It's the same text, but everyone has a different take on it.
I think the challenge about this is that they try to just cram so
Too
much
much in one,
information
yeah, that's right.
and print is so tiny, they cram so much in this one page. It's like they could have done a much better job with a lot fewer words if they were more selective.
That's true. It could have improved because the eye chart reading this was tough.
To wade through all the stuff just to figure out what it's saying.
Yeah.
I was thinking it's nice how they the layout, but then I thought Mickey Mouse with the ears. Does anybody else see that now?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I don't
It's
see
also a
it.
little too cutesy.
Little
It's like
cutesy.
they're trying to make too much of an effort on the appearance of the page as opposed to being able to
Yeah.
communicate the information that's contained there.
Right, absolutely.
Great observation.
Thank you. I hate cutesy in professional presentations. This is funny, not cutesy, but if you look at our stuff, what I try to teach is use graphics. The only stock one that I ever use is my clock on the bottom. For I know this is a group discussion. You'll see people use stock photos that, okay, well, why is there a picture of a river or of the sky or of a guy doing work? It adds nothing.
Yeah, I would say that they lost the figuring out how to target their audiences, because if you look at the graph there with one arrow,
It would have been very effective, yeah.
then you're going to pick up all the financial people who are watching the costs
Exactly.
go up. But there's none of that. So if you look at it, you're kind of wondering, what is this about?
When you read a magazine like PMI, there's so much there that you tend to go through. I mean, you get attracted to when they give you a nice chart and just a couple of blurbs, and you can kind of figure it out, and then you read the text. And so it kind of supports. The data is supported by the graph, and the text supports everything else if you have the time to read it. Often you're just skimming through it because you don't have the time.
It's also the media will affect what's perceived. What's in a magazine is different than what you're showing in a slideshow and has different impact from that.
Correct. Right. Well, it's also the way we're used to as a society now. We are so inundated. Growing up in the 70s, we had 3 TV channels, so you didn't have much of a choice. Everyone saw the evening news. We all kind of were homogeneous in a certain way. We all saw Walter Cronkite, or we saw John Chancellor, and that was it, right? And so now, 24-hour news. You have internet. You can get BBC. You can get Fox. You can get anything you want. And so now we are inundated with more and more information, and it has really led to sort of a fragmentation on how we experience life in America or in the world now. And that affects our communication because you can't assume today that the boss you're sending an email to has the same level of knowledge of what's going on, because he or she may be doing something else, or they may be traveling, or they may be getting different kinds of information that you are. So in a way, communication today is harder than it was 25 years ago when we were more homogeneous. I think an example of this is John Naisbitt, 30 years ago, wrote a book called Megatrends, and he predicted the future. He said that in the future we will have great technologies that will enable us to communicate in incredible ways. But he said that when you have high technology, you will need, the more technology there is, the more touch you will need, meaning the more you will need to reach out and interact with people and communicate. And so as humans, high tech and high touch go together. If only you do high tech, that's like my 8-year-old that she's just going to be looking at the iPad. I got to sometimes take that away and say, you need to go outside and play, because you need that human interaction. Otherwise, we're going to be drones, right? And we don't want to be drones.
Let me throw out a suggestion, particularly because of the importance of a residual message and the way our brains work. It's important to have a visual or a graphic associated with that residual message.
I like that a lot.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, we sort of did that, but I guess it wasn't really clear, because every communicative act is infinitely improvable. In retrospect, what we should do is we gave you this outline. I should give you a handout of this too. Here's a residual message. So I have a handout to go with it. How
I
would we
think
craft
this would
that?
look good in. I like your suggestion. It would look good as sort of an arrow that is like it's an iteration 1, 2, 3, and it's a circle, right? So you go from SDSR and you go to another SDSR and you go
Yeah.
back, and then in the middle, residual message.
I like that.
We're going to adopt that. Don't trademark it.
I am glad you said that. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Because we also have a core 2-day seminar. And I've been trying so hard to get, how do I get graphics into this? My latest one was this one, for what's in it for me. So how do I present the Whiffam concept in a graph? So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to take your suggestion. Whenever we do a residual message,
This
let's
is going to apply
make it
to a
visual.
bunch of different slides. So
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like
thank you.
it.
That's a great suggestion. Okay, we're 10 minutes, so we're running out of time?
We want to go through some of the backup slides, or I want to really address some more questions. Now, here's what we've done. All of your chairs, don't get up. All of your chairs have been rigged. If the people who do not ask questions, their chairs are going to flip over, and you might get hurt. So,
I have a question.
This is more of a comment that going back to your intro, there's another skill you need to be very successful there, and I think that's really creating a narrative. And you demonstrated that when you did your 2 different intros. One was just very linear. I did this, then I did this, then I did that. But the one that was more successful, and I think where you engage the audience, is building that narrative. And that's not an easy skill. That's something that also needs to be developed. And oftentimes, people who maybe have a very technical background have not done creative writing.
that's a wonderful observation.
Yeah.
That
And that's how you
narrative.
engage people, because then there's interest. Oh, you played water polo, ice cream, and
I'm going to give you a really good example that worked for me. When I went for the job interview to work for the developer, and this guy, we kind of connected. He was a little bit older, but we both kind of loved the same like music and stuff. So the first interview, we had a 2-hour interview. He brings me in. He says, "You know, Ravi, you're not qualified to be the head of construction for my company, but I like your resume. I just wanted to talk to you." So I fly in from Rochester. I meet with him, and he said, and this is what we talked about. We talked about Kurt Vonnegut. So we both love Kurt Vonnegut as an author. Talked about the Beatles. Talked about the '60s. Talked about music. Talked about philosophy, Buddhism, Taoism. Did not talk about anything related to, because he said, look, I'm not going to talk about real estate and construction because you kind of know that, but what I'm trying to do, what he was really trying to do is trying to figure out how I thought. And so when he called me back 6 weeks later, and I came in and he sits down and he goes, "I brought you back." I said, "Yes." He goes, "You know you're not qualified for the job." I said, "Well, why'd you bring me back?" And he said, "Well, I want to hire you." And then and really what he appreciated was the narrative. It's the story, because he asked me, he said, "Why have you worked in all these different places?" And I said, "Well, I don't hang around if I get bored. And if I like the job, I'll stay there for 10 years, and I've proven that. But I'm not going to just take somebody's money and hang on and become a paperweight." He liked the narrative. Whereas somebody might get defensive and say, "Well, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why I switched jobs so many times. You know, but you got to have a story, right?"
an arc of a story too.
And
That's a craft.
it's got to be, and
and
I think humor is very, very important. And humor is not that hard. Humor, the basis for humor, I think, is self-deprecation. You got to be, if you can't stand in front of the mirror and laugh at yourself, then you're really never going to have that narrative, right? But that narrative can boil down to any message that you have, whether it's an email. You got to be, because when that boss brings you in, you have an idea to save the company $10 million. The boss brings you in and says, "Well, I saw the email. What's the story?" He can be he's got to read the boss, right? So if it's that French analytical guy, he's going to come in with, you know, stacks and stacks of paper and say, "Look, I did regression analysis, and here's my Six Sigma," and all that stuff. But maybe if it was Lou, you would come in and say, "Look, Lou, I just got a gut feeling." And you know, this is kind of, and that kind of thing works. When we were doing a project in Toronto, and the client owed us $500,000, and we were doing, the next day we were going live with the system in Toronto for field testing. And I had a call to make, you know, so I called my boss, and I said, "Lou, they won't give us the $500,000, and we're a bonded company." Remember, it was Alstom, an international company. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to take my 2 engineers and go home." And he said, "I'm going to call him. I'm going to tell him that's exactly what you're going to do." They didn't believe, but Lou liked the narrative, and he said, "It's a little bit of brinksmanship, but I like it." But he said, he said, "How do you know they're going to go for this?" I said, "Because I worked I'm there all night, and I talk to what do you call it, the guards, you know, the gatekeepers, and the security guards When the security guard at a transit authority tells you that they're excited that they're going live tomorrow, that means that everybody in the organization has bought into it. And that means that they're not going to sacrifice their career. They will give you the check. Lou said, I like the idea, the narrative, he liked it. And an hour later, I got a call from the general manager, pick up your $500,000 check, leave your engineers, go back home. That's the power of a narrative.
And I want to add one more thing to that. You talk about telling the story. Whenever I do a presentation, there's a story in the title slides. If you just look at the titles, it's going to tell you a nice little story. That's about our don't look at, try not to look at anything in the white part, just look at the titles. Here's your story. 5 times more likely to advance, prevents rework, let's talk about what we discussed, not always what they hear. So this is a nice little story. It's all right up here. If I use only the title slides, I can give the same presentation because I have a story.
And I have one follow-on comment too about using graphics. That has to be taken under advisement too, because I've gotten presentations from consulting companies where they're loaded with graphics and I can't make heads or tail of the story they're trying to tell.
Well, question, was it a presentation or was it a report but in a PowerPoint format? Or is it just confusing?
Sometimes it was a pitch, sometimes they're doing consulting work, so sometimes those graphics, and that's a talent in of itself, somebody to translate a concept visually that it resonates with people too. So there's really 2 talents that you need to have, the narrative and proper use of a visual aid.
Okay, so I think we're running out of time. Are we done? 3 minutes? Okay.
Any last questions? Yes.
Well, you know what, I wanted to get more into the actual communication aspect, and in particular dealing with challenging audience, kind of like difficult, the people that are like biased, the people that are impatient, or they're like only listening kind of to themselves or thinking of a response or
Sounds like a 2-day seminar.
Sounds like a 2-day seminar.
That could be a 5-day seminar.
That would be there's a tremendous need for that.
The best structure to deliver but you still have probably a set of people. So what recommendations do you have, or what things do you have on dealing with those subjects?
I have this. I think this is the best way to address it. Okay. Look at the second to last column. What are their concerns? I had a similar problem at basically all of my consulting clients. There's always one group of people who are a royal pain in the butt. So what I would do, and they weren't bad people, but I would listen to what their concerns are, and then I would dig a little deeper. I would say, well, why the heck would they be concerned about that? That doesn't make any sense. And that's where I see all the red flags and all the bells go off in my head. Something is going on here. So when I had people like that, what I would do, I would say, I saw you looked upset. What's going on? And he would say, I don't know. I said, come on, let's just go get a beer, because we're stuck together for the next 6 months. Let's just have a drink. Tell me what's going on here. And then you find out all sorts of interesting stuff. So the short answer is, when you have the difficult people, take them out, get a drink, and then listen. 2 ears, 1 mouth. That's how I always dealt with it.
Remember, difficult people are probably your best friends because they're the ones that give you insight. Your friends, people who are very friendly, are not going to give you the kind of insight that you need, but the people that challenge you, it's a matter of empathizing and not getting derailed by it.
Okay, go ahead.
So now, is there anything specifically that you can give us in terms of pointers for either communicating to technical people or in working with more technical people when you're trying to improve communications, either between groups
Again,
or...
it's
I can give you a
empathy.
business card. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you know what it is? I think it's empathy also. When you manage engineers, let's say, and you're managing, I remember managing a software programmer who had 2 master's degrees from RIT, and I knew he was smarter than me. And I did not manage him like I would manage a project manager in the world of construction. He wanted to come in at 2 a.m. and work till 10. I said, you work the hours you want to work. I'm not going to question you as long as we see the results. And I almost pretty much just left him alone, and he did a great job. But he also appreciated that once in a while we'd go have a beer. And then he would tell me, and he was so soft-spoken that I had to be a really good listener, because he would say 3 words in a week. And he'd come to me one day on a Friday, he'd say, you know, Ravi, you know, I think that last test, you know, I think it's a little flawed. You might want to look into that. Now, if I was not listening, to me, that was like somebody with a megaphone saying, wake up, you idiot, you're a project manager, you don't know what the hell what's going on. So I went right to my technical people and said, he's got a point. Because this guy he speaks words as if it costs him $1 per word. That's the sort of the consummate technical programming person that we had. They didn't talk a lot. That means we had to listen even better.
Yeah, one thing to add to that. I've seen that problem, and this is how I addressed it. Okay, when your mom asks you what you do, what do you tell her? And put it in terms that your mom could understand. That's worked for me.
You mean simple?
Yeah. Not simple, but clear and concise.
Okay.
Yeah, and stuff that anybody could understand. Say, if I don't have a technical degree, how would you explain this to me? And that seems to work.
Well, my funny story for that is my father, as it turns out, at some point in his career became a technical writer, but military spec kind of technical writing. And nobody had any clue what it was he did. So my mother always used to say he writes dirty books.
Okay. Are you wrapping up, or do you want to?
We'll wrap up for a moment. We'll do the raffle, and then we can stay and ask more questions.
Thank you very much.
Afterwards. Thank you.